Hello, welcome to the All or Nothing podcast. Our official sponsors are KR Couriers and Transport Limited. This is a Northwest based courier company delivering all across the UK. They can assist in home moves and removals to large, heavy and bulky items, collections and drop-offs. Fast, safe and reliable deliveries. Please get in touch for a free quote. You'll find all the information within the description. Thank you. Hello everybody, welcome to the All or Nothing podcast with myself, Billy Moore, and today's special guest is the delightful Rosie Edwards. Thanks for coming on, Rosie.
Hi Billy, thanks so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
We met, ironically, in the city centre while I was doing a video about, the homeless epidemic in Merseyside, and I'm speaking to people, and you overheard me talking to myself as usual on my phone, and we had a great chat.
Absolutely.
You've done a little video, a little short, uploaded it, and people were saying, you need to get Rosie Edwards on. Well, she didn't know your second name, I didn't even know your number, I found out through Lawrence. So Lawrence, thank you. So before we get into the nitty gritty, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and growing up and what that was like.
Right, well, so I'm from London. I was born and bred in London, South London, Greenwich to be precise. I grew up in quite an unusual family for the time because it was a single parent household, or became a single parent household, and my father was a single parent. Back then, this is like 1972, 73, it was unheard of. Especially within the black community, it was unheard of. My father was an amazing man. So he raised myself and my three older siblings in London. And to be honest, I always struggled growing up in London. Born and bred a city girl, but I'm a country girl at heart, really am. So it's interesting that I'm now back in another city. And what a city. Liverpool is a great city. It has so much going for it. The best thing about Liverpool, in my opinion, has to be the people. Conversely, that's also the worst part about Liverpool. Some of the people, and in particular those people who are in positions of so-called power and authority, particularly those that are in positions where they are meant to be serving the public, but as has evidence shown, they are clearly serving themselves and their own interests. So I started out in housing and homelessness, I suppose, almost 30 years ago. Started working with people with physical disabilities and mental disabilities. Absolutely loved it. And so found myself actually going to do a degree course, which is the first degree at the time it was offered in the country where they had modules in special needs. And that took me to Kent. That was a very interesting place and time in my life. I was very much, I've always been an activist. It's just in my blood, I think. In Kent, I became particularly active in relation to the slave trade. In particular, the trading in Africans, because I had discovered the Church of England's role in it, which shocked me greatly. And there is evidence of that, which can still be seen today on the main entrance gates of the cathedral. I had a 12-year fight with the Church of England to get them to publicly acknowledge their role as profiteers in that heinous trade, because the narrative they'd always put out before was simply in relation to their work with abolishing the trade. And as most of us know, the abolition only came about because of economic reasons, not because there was a sudden attack of conscience. Anyway, 12 years it took me to this battle with the church. And they threw everything at me. And when I say everything, I'm talking spiritually, everything at me. And Canterbury City, very much like Liverpool City, is a city that is run by Freemasons. And they're not just your very nice little Rotarians.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. On one level, that's what most people will know. Yeah. I might say more about that later. Who knows?
But it's quite interesting the knowledge that you have and the information that you've been, receiving over the years, and the actual evidence that's supported by all the work you've done. It shows that, we live in a society that is just, like we talked about earlier on, feathering your own nest.
Absolutely.
Making sure your side of the bread's buttered. While other people are sitting there with cap in hand, leaving themselves on bricks. And that's what's going on, within the city of Liverpool. And I'm quite, see, when I speak to people on the streets, I'm speaking to myself. I don't see any difference.
Absolutely.
In class, or, I don't separate myself or make me elevate myself, or I'm not no more than, I'm looking down. I'll sit down, I'll have a chat, and I'll give them a hug, and I'll speak to them. And I know, what it's like to be there. And I'll say, look, there's a way out. But you've got to be willing to walk down that path. Now, what has it been that's been your, what's your motivation these days?
I think my motivation today is what it's always been, and that is to be of service to others. Yeah. I consider it a real privilege, the jobs that I've done, which have primarily always been jobs which involve helping others or being of service to others. And to me, those jobs are a privilege. Yeah. Where you are able to help a fellow human being, what greater job can there be than that? Interestingly enough, though, what I've experienced in many of those jobs, particularly working in local authorities, is that that sentiment isn't shared necessarily by colleagues, rarely by senior management. For them, it's often because there is an element of power, if you like, that comes with those kind of positions. If you imagine, for example, as a housing officer, well, you have the power to affect somebody's ability to have a home or not. That is not a power that I take lightly. I consider it a privilege. However, I've witnessed all too often others who abuse that and who do see it as power to actually negatively impact people's lives. That doesn't, never has, and never will sit well with me. And I don't care what title you might have. You could have the title of chief executive of a local authority or service director. I don't care what your title is, because your job is to ensure delivery of that public service equally to all. That means you don't discriminate against somebody because this is somebody that has been homeless and is representing as homeless yet again for the umpteenth time. You don't discriminate against somebody because they have offending a history, i.e. they've been in prison. You don't discriminate against people because of their religious beliefs and practices, their sexuality, sexual preferences, their ethnicity. You don't discriminate. Now, on paper, of course, they're not allowed to discriminate. And they'll all say that, oh, well, no, we don't discriminate. Well, I'm telling you, in practice, as somebody that's worked in a number of these local authorities, oh, they do. They absolutely do. I have an interesting situation at the moment, which I don't know how much I can talk about, because part of it is a police matter. But it involves Liverpool public officials. Who seem to think that it is perfectly okay to not only make very defamatory comments about some individuals who are businessmen in this city, but to subject me to what was a race hate crime. And the person that did this was at the time, suspended Labour councillor, still a councillor, but suspended from the Labour Party at that time. Their employer is still a Labour MP, and his response to my raising my concerns about this behaviour by his employee evidenced to me which side of the fence he sits on when it comes to racial discrimination, shall we say, and upholding the Equality Act 2010, and being cognizant of what your role is as a publicly elected official, and that you should treat everyone equitably. That certainly was not my experience from either of these individuals. And I will say it again, that they've made a mistake with me if they think that I was just going to lie down and accept that. That behaviour is unacceptable. You are accountable to me as a member of the public, as a resident of Liverpool, and you're accountable to the people of this city that you serve.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I'm holding you accountable. And I will hold you accountable as well, Liverpool City Council, if you fail to do what you have promised to do, which is to support me with this matter being investigated. I will hold you accountable, Merseyside Police, if you also fail, which sadly so far you appear to be doing, because there's been no contact from yourselves in over a month with regards to this matter. It is not acceptable that those who are called and or swear on oath to serve the public, failing those public duties and failing in some ways which are so damning, they potentially cost people their lives. And yet there's no accountability. I could speak about Grenfell. I was on my way last week to Grenfell. Because of something that happened, which is still undoubtedly one of the worst tragedies in this country, where 13 young black children lost their lives in a house fire, which the community has always believed to have been a racially motivated attack. And that was a New Cross fire, 18th of January 1981. I was personally affected by that fire. And I was on my way to Grenfell to participate in this silent walk and to just show solidarity and be there for both survivors and victims of Grenfell. And I was actually caught on a train which had to be stopped, of all places, in New Cross, because there was a fire on the station. So I wasn't able to make it, but it was really difficult for me. It was a very triggering experience, shall we say.
Oh yes, definitely. The experiences you're feeling, they resurface. It's like, and coming to like exactly what you were talking about, like discrimination with people on the streets, whether they've been in addiction or mental health or, whatever the background is, right? And you said, yes, they do, right? Now, I have friends calling me up and saying, Billy, right, I've just got out of prison, right? I've had people coming to visit me, right, whilst I'm in prison, right, telling me that they're going to provide this service, that service, when I get released, right? When I get released, all they want from me is my national insurance number, right? I'm on the streets, I've got nowhere to live, I'm getting kicked out of Salvation Army's hostels and supported accommodations, and I'm getting put in hotels, and I'm not settled because I want to go and visit my daughter, right? Because I spend the night out, they see that as a consequence, and I am not homeless if it's more than 2 nights out. And it's like, and he was telling me this story, and he watched this little upload that I did with yourself, and he's like, look, Rosie speaks the truth. She's telling her how it is, Bill. I need to speak to her. And he's told me that like these services have come into the prison. I know what the prison system's like. I've been on the receiving end of it. It's just a cattle farm.
Absolutely.
It's just a revolving door. People going in. There's no rehabilitation. The shelter. I was going to come in. We're going to sort this out. We're going to sort that. I've done all the mentoring roles for shelter, this, that, and the other. The same people come in 3 weeks later. And have been homeless. It's Well, where's this money going?
Exactly.
What's going on? You know, why don't they support rehabs or tackle the addiction and the mental health issues head on, instead of just leaving them in the streets, and then moving them on in the streets. And I know, people come up and they're begging and they're asking for tow, and I know what it's for, because they've got themselves that deep in that dark hole of addiction that's what they need to bury reality. They can't face it, so they escape.
Absolutely.
And they're behaving and acting a little bit odd. You know what I mean? It's sad to see. It is.
It is. But Billy, you asked a really important question there, where you asked, why are they not tackling effectively the causes? Because all they're doing, these services, they're supposedly or reportedly tackling the symptoms, but actually it's what are the causes that contribute to people ending up on the street? Well, for a long time, the majority of the reason and the majority of persons that you'll find on the streets were single men. Okay, is it coincidental that many of these men would have been ex-military personnel?
Yeah.
So these are people that had put themselves forward to ultimately pay what could have been the ultimate price, okay, in safeguarding the freedoms and the rights and the interests of this country and other countries. And yet, those that survive their time in the military, how are they then treated when they come to the end of their service period? I was shocked when I was working for a local authority in a rural area where there's a big military presence. I was shocked at the number of these people who were presenting as homeless to us. And I was shocked because I had learnt about the assistance that's available, for example, from the RBL, the Royal British Legion, also SAFA. I always forget what that's shortened for, but I know it's the Soldiers, Sailors and Air Force, I believe, Association. There is assistance that's available through these services to help those once they leave the military to secure accommodation, etc. But interestingly enough, it seemed that many of the military personnel were not being given this information. We managed to change that. The service director for the local authority I was working for, I'm going to give you a name check because you're an amazing lady, Angie Rawlings. Angie Rawlings is beautiful little 5'0" blonde from out of Hackney, London, but is now living in Wiltshire, was the service director for housing and the housing options homelessness team when I started working there. I credit her so much with my attitude, my approach, and the skills that I've developed in supporting, advising and assisting people who are homeless. Because how she trained us was from a prevention model. And that's really important because this prevention model has now been enshrined in legislation, which is a Homeless Reduction Act 2017, which spells out very clearly to local authorities what they are meant to do when somebody presents to them as homeless or at risk of homelessness. Yeah. What seems to be the case definitely here, as I've experienced in so many other local authorities, is that local authorities are failing to comply with their statutory duties. So if somebody is actually homeless on the street, the local authority has a duty to assist that person to relieve that homelessness, which means assist them to secure accommodation. So, for example, did you know if you are homeless, you can go to the local authority. If you find a suitable accommodation, if you're under the age of 35, I'd say because of the local housing allowance, how much housing benefit will pay you, you need to be looking at a room in a shared house. You go to the local authority with details of a room in a shared house. The local authority should assist you to secure that accommodation. If you're over the age of 35, you can potentially look at a one-bedroom flat. Make sure it's affordable, but again, that's something the local authority can look at with you to ensure that property would be affordable for you. And rent in advance, deposits, etc., the local authority can and should assist you with that. The levels of homelessness in Liverpool City, I have never seen the like of before.
Yeah.
And I thought I had experienced homelessness in other cities, but I have never seen the like of it before. And what I am feeling more and more, very much from the experiences of people who are homeless that I meet and speak to all the time, but also what I've experienced and what I'm witnessing and learning about the service provision in this city. It's a business. Homelessness is a business. There are organisations that are making money out of people being homeless and not providing them with the appropriate support that they should be getting. To me, that is beyond immoral.
Yeah.
To capitalise out of other people's misery, poverty, and is despicable. Now, I'm not saying that if you are a service set up to assist people who are homeless, if your service is a limited company, then of course you're looking to make a profit. But that should not be the driving force for you proclaiming to be assisting people who are homeless. I have no problems in talking about, for example, my own landlords. The big help. Well, we prefer, myself and the other tenants, prefer to call them by what they are, the big fail. Because that's certainly, in my experience, what they have done and what they continue to do. I became aware of this organisation, interestingly enough, ironically enough, when I was looking at moving to Liverpool and looking at jobs, I came across this organisation who on paper sounded phenomenal. Just the sort of organisation I'd want to work for because of the ethos and the client group that they purport to support. So people with offending history, people with mental health issues, substance misuse issues. These are people that I love working with and trying to support. I sent them my CV. I received a call within a day of them receiving my CV. Very excited, loved my CV. My goodness me, so many skills and experience. We'd love to have you working for us, It turned out the day before the interview, when I was doing some research on the organisation, that unfortunately you need to be a driver for that post. So that fell through. But they said to me, if I am interested in moving to Liverpool, keep in touch. They've just inherited a portfolio of 500 properties. I thought, wow, that's fantastic. I'm thinking, wow, that's fantastic. The number of people they're going to be able to help. If they've secured 500 properties, that's amazing. A few months later, a situation occurred where I was at risk where I was living. I was urged by the police to contact this organisation. I did. I explained the situation. They said, we'll move you here as a priority. That was on the Monday. The Friday, I moved up here. I was moved to Stanley Road. Now, I didn't know Liverpool. The only place in Liverpool I visited was Crosby, where I have family. And it's this family member that was encouraging me to move. I don't see them, by the way. Anyway, so Stanley Road to me was, I had no idea what it was like as an area. It was right opposite the North Park. There was a gang that was operating from the North Park. We began to experience some quite heavy antisocial behaviour. But for me, what was really concerning was the property next door, also owned by my landlord's a big help, was supported accommodation for single vulnerable men. Except none of these men, according to what they told me, were getting any support. Well, that's very concerning. So the first question I asked them is, let's have a look at your support plan. Because from my experience, I know, having worked in supported accommodation, having helped to set up supported accommodation, by the way, also. So I'm very familiar with policies and procedures and protocols for running such organisations. That often clients don't maybe understand the support plan. And I thought, well, if I can sit with them individually and go through it and explain it to them. So imagine my shock when every one of them is saying to me, well, I don't actually have a support plan. Or one of them said to me, what is a support plan? That was an alarm bell for me. Because if as an organisation you are meant to be providing supported accommodation, you need to have a framework of support in place for these vulnerable people. Because if you don't have that framework, if that support is not being provided, what do you think will happen? Well, let me tell you what will happen. One of these people who live next door became very close to. He would call himself my Scouse son. And I looked at him as a son. He's a beautiful young man. He was only 24 years of age. And he was the one who told me, in response to my question about the support plan, he asked me, well, what's the support plan? This young man was vulnerable. And he wasn't getting support. And he ended up taking his life in July 2021. And to use one of his expressions, my head fell off. And it's taken me a long time I can't say get over, because I haven't got over it. Because he was failed. And I learned that he wasn't the only one. The Big Help set up their housing service in November 2019. And from November 2019 until July 2021, when my friend took his life, there's been between 3 and 5 suicides of their vulnerable tenants. This is in 18 months. This is shocking. So I did what I knew to do as a professional. I contacted the local authorities, adult safeguarding, and made a safeguarding referral. They were alarmed, they told me, by what I disclosed to them. They were going to investigate. 6.5 months into this investigation, and I'm constantly on their case, finding out what's going on and how things are progressing. And I'm constantly just being told by Sefton Council about meetings that are taking place. Never being told about the outcome of the meetings, any actions that have been agreed. Suddenly, after 6.5 months, the manager that was supposed to be dealing with the investigation informs me that it's now her manager, who I understand was the service director, who is now chairing this investigation. He doesn't respond to my emails. He doesn't respond until I have to email the former manager and say, tell your boss to contact me and respond to my emails. I then get an email at 10:20 at night from a complaints officer at Sefton Council, apologising for the service director's failure to respond to my email in full, but he'll do that by the end of the following week. It took him another 3 weeks, and his response was basically to tell me they're not going to be communicating with me anymore. No real reason given. And that investigation was seemingly dropped. Now, as I said before, and I will say it again, and I'll keep saying it, this city is run by Freemasons and criminals, and they're interchangeable, by the way. Peter Mitchell, the chief executive of the Big Help, is an ex-Labour councillor. He was a Labour councillor for 20 years for Croxteth. He was suspended in 2019, funnily enough. As it seems, so many Labour councillors I've discovered were suspended from the party in 2019, pending an investigation. His investigation was into sexual harassment. Also seems to be quite a common theme I've discovered with Labour councillors. Well, it seems that he jumped ship before that investigation could conclude and became a Liberal candidate and then independent, I believe. But he's the chief executive of an organisation, the Big Help. There doesn't seem to be any oversight of this organisation. They seem to be slipping through the cracks. But while they're busy slipping through the cracks, they have charge of very vulnerable people, some of the most marginalised people that you'll find in society. As I said, people with substance misuse issues, people with mental health difficulties, people with offending histories that need that support to enable them to move forward with their lives. And they're not getting that support, or they certainly weren't getting that support. The questions I began to ask of this organisation, eventually I learnt, because they weren't being responded to, were being treated as a complaint. That surprised me. But nonetheless, it's my right as a tenant, a service user, to complain. I then asked them for their complaints policy. Again, that's my right. This was refused by the Chief Executive, Peter Mitchell, by the Chief Operating Officer, by their Governance and Compliance Officer, Joseph Golding, who happens to be the son of the Chief Executive's partner. The nepotism in this organisation, by the way, is off the scale. The assistant chief executive is a partner of Peter Mitchell, Colette Golding. It's her son who's the governance and compliance officer. All of these people have refused me, as a tenant, a copy of their complaints policy. Now, everyone I've spoken to about this is shocked, and they said, but they can't refuse. I said, I know they can't refuse me, but they have. I have been battling to expose this organisation and any other organisation in Liverpool that is seeking to capitalise off the misery and suffering of vulnerable people, because that is exactly what the Big Help are doing, and they're making a lot of money from doing it. I mean, their coffers have swelled by £9 million from last year. I happen to know where most of that money's come from. Yeah, that individual actually offered me a job. This is the individual that was funding the Big Help. He offered me a position with his corporation when he learnt how they were seemingly squandering his money, not providing the support to vulnerable people. Unfortunately, his integrity came into question for me. And this is somebody I'd known for many, many years. And so I walked away from that position. That position, the salary that I was offered, my head did fall off almost. I've never been offered that kind of money before in my life. It's over £250,000. That was my starting salary. And yeah, there are one or two people when I've spoken to, told them about this, and they said, you walked away from that money? Oh yeah. Oh, hell yes, I walked away. I can walk away from a lot more than that, because my integrity is never going to be for sale.
You're not going to sell your soul for...
My soul, and those are the very words I used to him. I'm the same woman you knew 30 years ago. My soul wasn't for sale then. Yeah. It's not for sale now, mate. So when you're up against, people who have these levels of wealth and power, it's very true, that saying, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. But I think that's true if you lack integrity.
Yeah.
Because there are people in positions of power who do good because they have integrity, because they're about transparency in what they're doing.
So it's because they've got a care in nature. That's the be all and end all.
That's the starting point.
Look, you've got to, right? I've been in and out of systems all my life, and I've seen, I can see through people, bullshit radars and everything springs to mind. People who are in it just for money,
yeah,
right? Send this and that round, like fucking cutting corners, and you think, I know the service, I know the support packages, I know where I've been in support of the accommodation where there is no support. You might have someone come in once a week, sit you around, who's not professionally,
exactly,
who's not professionally equipped,
yeah,
to psychoanalyze people or to address issues that have had an impact, an impact on their lives. Like anything, I've been and saying, fucking, I could counsel you.
Exactly.
It's you that needs help, not me. Right? It's like, because I'm thinking. So anyway,
yeah,
I've been angry with the services over the years, and I've worked in services where I know the cook in the books, right, with addicts who are relapsing and they keep constantly turning up, and what they're doing is they're enabling them.
Absolutely.
Right? They're enabling them, right? They become conditioned to just turn up. You don't want to move them on, because if they move them on, where's the money?
Exactly. Because there's a pot of money that's attached to that person.
Look, Rosie, I've sat in offices and I've overheard and I thought, you horrible bastards, all you're doing, what we need to do is to get the tender.
Yeah.
Like, so to get the tender, we need to get the tender for this.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is like cook these books, right? And I'm getting, Bill, get to the file, get these, ring them, you've seen them, I don't know. But no one's engaged.
Yeah.
We haven't physically engaged with anyone, right? And it pissed me off. I ended up leaving.
But that's what'll happen.
I got the fucking shock, to be fair.
That's what'll happen. Because if you work for a service like that and you go against them, know that they're going to try and come after you, okay? I've had 3 employment tribunal cases, okay? I've won every one of them, by the way. And it's, because I don't play. If you're wrong, I am a dog wearing a bone, okay? I'm going to hold you accountable. But the The second one is the one that really stays with me. It upset me deeply because I ended up taking that case because of the death of a young man.
Yeah.
Somebody that had been addicted, was doing really well in his recovery. And something that Billy, you'd made reference to earlier about where, for example, people are being penalised if they're in supported accommodation or an accommodation where they've been told, well, you can't stay out overnight, and if you do stay out overnight, then you're going to lose your space. I mean, come on a minute. Hang on a minute. When you're talking about people who've been on the streets, who've been homeless for a period of time, you cannot reasonably expect them to be able to comply with your rules immediately. You can't, and it's unreasonable to do that. Where is your compassion? This instance, of David, I'll never forget. I mean, how many years has it been now, David? It must be coming up 20 years. I will never forget you, because what that service did literally did cost you your life.
Yeah.
Because I had asked them before I left my shift that day, if anything should happen and he turns up late, please make sure you let him in. Please make sure you let him in. They didn't. And he ended up being given a fatal dose of heroin. And all because he turned up 10, 15 minutes after the doors were closed and they wouldn't let him in. See, this is the sort of BS that I'm talking about, okay?
Bullshit.
Yeah. Because it was more important to that member of staff to uphold these ridiculous rules than to exercise some compassion to a young man, because they were aware of the threats to him at that time. He had made them aware and I had made them aware, and yet they chose to ignore that and effectively put that young man at risk, and he ended up dying. And he hadn't used, by the way. He hadn't been using at that point for nearly 2 months. But the dealers that he was frightened of had found him and they gave him this fatal dose. So you tell me whose blood is on whose hands here? These services that are making money, that are profiteering from these vulnerable people with substance misuse issues, alcohol issues, mental health, who need support, who actually need some compassion. They are being used, they're being capitalised on by these services that are making a name for themselves, like the Big Help now, sponsoring events like the Windrush event. I was so incensed by that, because I know as a black woman, as a tenant, who is being subjected to their discrimination, they have no business sponsoring an event like that. But hey, if you can be seen to be doing the right thing, if your name can be associated with these good causes, then people are not going to see the shit that's actually up beneath the surface. Just start scratching the surface and always follow the money. Always follow the money. Because that's going to tell you volumes about what an organisation's really about.
I'll tell you what an organisation's really about, right? Because it's bringing up stuff for me, and I've read about this, right? Now, I got employed. I was a recovering drug addict, right? I've been, in and out of prisons. Dave gave me a role, right, as a recovery coordinator to help people like myself. It's a paid role. It's a job, right? I went for the interview. I've been to a few interviews, but I got this one. Eventually, after numerous knockbacks, and I sat down with someone who said, look, these are the buzzwords, these are the keywords. This is what they want to hear, right? They don't want to have you sitting there, Bill, going, look, I can do this, I can achieve that. They want to hear like fucking words that you've never fucking learned before, right? So I've got to come up with all this stuff.
Jargon.
Yeah, so I'm coming up with this jargon, right? Trying to be more articulate, trying to be false as fuck, right, just to get this job. I get this job, right? I'm in this role for a few years. It gets awards, by the way, right? Recovery coordinator of the year. I've got a photograph in the office on the wall. Like, fuck, I'm doing a great job. I'm engaging, I'm proactive, I'm out in the community. I'm not going to mention who these are because it's not worth it. The reality is, right, I get diagnosed with cancer. I told you about this before. I get diagnosed with cancer. I'm working for this company. clean for almost 5 years. I haven't touched anything. I'm abstinent. I don't smoke. I don't drink. Right, I'm quite healthy. Boom, I'm hit with this illness. I unfortunately have to take medication now. I'm allergic to medication. I break out in all kinds of fucking disasters, crime, fucking consequences. I don't break out in lumps and bumps. Do you know what I mean?
No.
I break out in handcuffs and prison sentences.
But they should know that when they prescribe that medication to you.
When I spoke to I'm relapsing, and I've emailed occupational health, me work. Look, I'm not well. I'm suffering. Right. I couldn't. In the end, right. I had to go to a tribunal. Oh, I got the sack, right. And I'm trying to explain to them that I'd emailed you for help. And I got them quick response emails, we are out the office. We will back in 2 weeks.
Your standard.
Yeah. We will be back in 2 weeks, unfortunately. So I'm emailing and I'm contacting them, I'm phoning, and I'm getting nowhere, right? I goes and says, look, I've got the evidence to support, right? Printed out. And you're failing to help me, right? One of your employees, right? Employees as such, and you're failing to provide some help, and occupational health, right? And I was thinking, for fuck's sake. So yeah, and when I sat down with the senior practice manager of this service, and she was just not interested in what I had to say, and I was trying to explain, do you understand addiction? Right, even though you're working in an addiction field, do you understand what it is? Do you understand what mental health is? Do you understand the mental gymnastics you go through and the feelings? Have you ever explored that? You're sitting on your fucking high horse, and she's not interested. It was and I just thought, fucking shout, nice one. See you later.
Yeah, and that is sadly a reality. Yeah. See, a lot of these people, they'll go to university and they'll get their degrees, and you've got a qualification which says that you've studied this. But actually, what do you have in terms of any real lived experience or knowledge of people who've had real lived experiences? This is why, for me, it's always been, you see, somebody like you, Billy, you are such an amazing inspiration. Because people like you make the best peer mentors. Why? Because you've walked what you're talking. Most people can talk the talk. They can put all these letters after their name because of degrees they've got and PhDs and all this bullshit, because it's bullshit, mate. It's only theoretical. What's the real experience that you have? What's the real knowledge that you have of somebody that's been in a situation like this? I was homeless. When I was 19, okay? That experience has never left me. I've often said I don't know if that is perhaps partly why I have the attitude I have towards people who are homeless. By the way, you'll notice that people who are homeless, that's how I describe them, because that's what they are. They are people, first and foremost. They're not a homeless person, okay? That's a person, that's a human being who, for whatever their circumstance and situation is, they've ended up homeless. Somebody that uses substances or abuses substances, that's a person, okay? They're not a smackhead, crackhead. Okay, that's a person with a substance misuse issue. It's somebody with an alcohol issue. It's somebody with a mental health issue. These are people. And until we as a society regain values that we were deliberately programmed out of by the likes of Thatcher, excuse me for swearing, okay, who said there's no such thing as society, it's all about the individual, and started to break down society as we knew it. So communities, well, first of all, let's start with the family. The family unit was broken down. Difficulties in the relationship. Well, mum, we'll help you with accommodation, but yeah, the dad can't be living with you. Okay? You get all the welfare support, but dad can't be living with you. That's contributed greatly to the breakdown in the family unit as we knew it. The nuclear family unit as we knew it then. So then you start attacking the services for children. One of the main services, of course, was our youth services. I was working in the youth services at the time. I was actually planning on going into teaching. That's until I had a good look at the national curriculum. I went, hell no. I'm not going to be teaching this shit to our children. I'm not going to be programming our children so they'll just become little automatons, little robots in this little capitalist, consumerist, obsessed society and world we're living in. What about the individual child? So no, I walked away from that. But what I've done always is I've always observed what's going on around us. And who is it that's pulling the strings? And in what direction are they taking us? Well, I saw from the 80s how they were systematically breaking down the family unit, systematically breaking down communities. We've seen here in Liverpool the managed decline that's taken place and is continuing to take place amongst so many areas. It's only when I moved here and I began to see for myself and get a greater understanding of what's been going on in Liverpool. I learnt, for example, the proximity of L8, should we say, to the city. Well, hell, I can see why that managed decline happened, because that's prime land, isn't it? It's sitting on. So, as I said before, you follow the money and you'll see how it is, and sadly, more often than not, why it is. So many services will suddenly spring up. At the moment, I understand that mental health is a buzzword. So we're going to start seeing more services, community services that are now purporting to support people with mental health difficulties. Why? Because there's money attached to it. Homelessness, there's still money attached to that. But who is holding these services accountable? That's what is concerning me, because they're being given a license to wreck people's lives, to wreck families, and no one's holding them accountable. Central government doesn't seem to be holding them accountable. Trust me, I've written to central government about this organisation, the Big Help. I've written to just about everybody. The Liverpool Echo, well, let's not get me started on them. Okay.
The Manchester Evening News, you mean?
yeah. That's a more appropriate name for it. 1.4 million they're paid by the Labour Party. Did you know that? A year, 1.4 million. Wait. Oh, well, no wonder the Liverpool Echo didn't want to report on the story that I gave them. The initial reporter was horrified when I gave her the story and said, oh my God, massive public interest story. Yeah, except your public interest editor, who's good friends with, guess who? My landlord. Ex-Labour councillor, didn't run with the story. They buried it as well. And it is very frustrating.
Oh, we won't bury it on this podcast, Gail.
Hell no. Oh, hell no. No. And this is why, I am so thankful, Billy, that you've invited me to come on your podcast. As you know, I had no idea who this gentleman was when I bumped into him in the city. And do you know what it was? It's because I saw him with his camera and I thought he was filming people who are homeless. I thought, I'm going to have a word with you, mate. If that's what you'll do, that's exploitation, not on my bloody watch, you won't. And lo and behold, it's such an honour to meet you. It really, really is. And I do hope that, we're able to continue this conversation.
Brilliant. So when we come to the end of a podcast, right, I always ask, right, for a pearl of wisdom. Right, what would you say to a young Rosie Edwards coming through the doors of life? If you had an opportunity, to speak to yourself, give yourself a little bit of guidance so you could turn a corner, what would you say? This is like the most significant comments at the end of a podcast.
Wow. I think more than anything, I'll say to her, keep going. You know that, when you get knocked down, you're going to get back up. And be proud of the fact that no one's ever been able to buy you, Rosie. And they never will.
With that, thank you very much. Lovely.
Thank you so much, Billy.
Brilliant, Rosie. Thank you.
Thank you.